Tom, we're back here at the UN for the Program of Action. The NGOs, pro and anti, spoke today, and I think you said what a lot of pro-gun NGOs and countries have been thinking about for a long time, and you were very direct about it. You said, you know what, all of you, most of you participants, you are great speakers, but when it comes to listening, you don't know how to listen.
That's right. We essentially said that for years and years and years, going back to 1995, the UN has never acknowledged the legitimacy of civilian firearms protection, that they just can't seem to swallow that, to understand that. And we said that if the program of action is to ever be meaningful, it has to acknowledge that. And that's a major, major obstacle to what the UN is doing. They think that civilian firearms ownership is bad. Mm-hmm. And you get that hit constantly when you listen to these people.
And it's the same thing with the Arms Trade Treaty. That's why it's not going anywhere. Not that we want it to go anywhere, but they will not, as John Bolton said how many years ago, they will not put it in writing. They claim it's not about our Second Amendment, but they won't put it in writing.
Absolutely. In fact, if it's not about the Second Amendment, what's wrong with putting it in writing?
Absolutely.
And there's been language suggested that makes that specific point, and that language has been rejected in the ATT.
Another big concern, I was talking with several people from the industry, is what's called ISACs, the International Small Arms Control Standards, that this is going to end up in the Program of Action. And as Rick Patterson, speaking for the sporting arms and ammunition manufacturers, made very clear today, it doesn't belong in the Program of Action because, you know what, this is being produced and put together by groups like IANSA, and it's all about promoting their anti-gun agenda.
That's right. And ISACs, International Small Arms Control Standards, is promulgated by essentially the UN bureaucracy without the real participation of any states. And Mr. Patterson made the point today that the UN is supposed to be states making decisions, not bureaucrats making decisions. And the ISAC process has been very bastardized by the fact that it's been adopted by the anti-gun people. It essentially has gotten to be quite radical, and it is not taken into consideration the views of any of the states. The United States has not participated at all in ISACs.
In fact, SAMI pulled out of it.
SAMI pulled out of ISACs because of the rejection, of how radical it got. Other private groups have also objected to ISACs. The International Association of Arms Museums is objecting to a kind of a ridiculous ISACs requirement that any antique arms that go into a museum be demilitarized, to be essentially modified before they can even be put in museums. That's ridiculous.
And for people who don't understand, what exactly is ISACs? Is it just a laundry list of everything they want about gun ownership and registration and regulations?
That's exactly what ISACs is. It is a UN bureaucracy which has put together some hypothetical standards for countries to adopt all over the world. It's an extensive program. They're making presentations not only on ISACs itself, but on a software program so that countries can theoretically evaluate whether or not their legislation meets these international standards. And it really is it's a very disturbing development. And we've not liked the ISACs process. It's like you say, SAMI tried to cooperate in the ISACs process, the American manufacturers, and they withdrew because essentially, no matter what they say, it was rejected by the anti-gun people who've dominated the process.
Is this, though, going to be a hard fight to keep it out of the Program of Action simply because it is so strongly supported by the UN?
That's a good question, and you're not quite sure how they'll try to integrate it into the Program of Action. It may be something as innocuous as just acknowledging the existence of ISACs. But let me make a point here about how the UN works, and this goes back to what Bolton said about 10 years ago. It starts out very small. If the Program of Action just acknowledges ISACs, you can be very sure that at the next Program of Action meeting, we'll talk about that in a little bit, at the next Program of Action meeting, they'll further acknowledge and endorse ISACs. So it's one little step after the other.
And it's all about what they say is going after the illegal trade, but when you sit in that room, it's all about civilian ownership and making it impossible for us to do what we do in this country with the Second Amendment.
That's right. And in fact, there's a big discussion about what they call norm setting. And years ago, the United Nations figured out, and this is very clever, that they have a certain amount of goodwill. And if the United Nations endorses something, it becomes an international norm, you know. Like everybody knows about the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. It's a good thing. But that kind of sets a norm. And they figured out that everything they do, which controls small arms / is gun control, sets an international norm. They try to change value. So not only do you have the threat of a treaty itself, which in the United States is law, but you have the threat of a changing of norms in this culture war. And our norm in America is that civilians have the right to have arms under the Second Amendment.
Well, as one of the NGOs made clear today, you talk about human rights. What about the rights in these countries where these people don't have human rights, but for the right for them to be able to defend themselves?
Exactly. That was made by 2 speakers today, from the firearms community, that people, if they have the right to defend themselves, they have the right to the means to defend themselves. One speaker talked about women having the right to defend themselves. Pointed out that women were a big issue, that if women have rights, they have the right to defend themselves.
And made a good point that this is the first time you've got a woman leading this conference as chair, and you think that they would be able to relate to the fact that when you look at so many of these countries, whether it's Africa or Syria or Iran, you've got women who are defenseless, they are helpless against traitors and dictators, and it's, you know, and yet they refuse to acknowledge it.
It's an amazing thing.
It really is. It's amazing, frustrating. But I also thought it was also an interesting thing today. Out of the blue, IANSA sponsors this speaker today from Armitex, which is a German company that has to do with smart gun technology. What were they doing here?
I have no idea.
Everybody was just shaking their head. It was like an advertisement.
They were saying, well, smart guns are a good thing, and if we have smart guns, guns will never be able to cause harm. Well, that's an interesting concept, because I think that part of what guns are about is the ability to cause harm to people who are attacking you. It's back to self-defense. But anyway, how they got in there is just amazing. I can't give you any specifics, but it came out of the blue.
It was like a free advertisement in the midst of a discussion where we're talking about everything from human rights, civilian ownership, sporting. Canada was there again today, driving home the same point that many of you did, which is this should not be about civilian ownership. This should not be about markings and tracings. And we know about registration. It was a joke in our country. They brought that up today.
That's right, and there were some very good points made by Canada.
Okay, so this goes on for what, another week?
This goes on for another week, but this is just the start. Arms trade treaty will come back the week of October 22nd.
So don't think it's gone away, because it hasn't.
And then what the likely development there is they'll probably pass a resolution which will authorize a further conference, probably something next spring, maybe. And then also, Jenny, they're discussing here how far ahead they're going to plan.
2018.
Yeah, 2018. Yep. So we've got another 6 years worth of meetings, kind of on tap.
But we got the Program of Action, the Arms Trade Treaty coming up again. That's why more important than ever, this election in November.
Absolutely.
Alrighty, thanks as always.
Thank you.
Alrighty.